Thank you for inviting me tonight. What I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the archaeology that's been going on incidentally over the last only 5 years, really, since the trust bought the house from the previous owners for £1. They couldn't find anybody, or at least people were reluctant to take it on because of its historical significance. So a trust was set up, and they to preserve the house. I mean, the purpose is, and within that we have an archaeology group. There's also a history group, and there's other engineering and restoration groups, and catering, and a shop, and events, and all sorts of things go on. And archaeology is just one part of that. And within the archaeology group, our sort of objectives are to help the trust preserve the heritage of the site, train volunteers, understand more about the history and the how the site has been used over the past, produce some material, and hopefully increase community understanding of the location. So there is a master plan which is, I think, has a 25-year horizon, and getting on with all sorts of things whilst trying to fundraise and to get things moving. At the moment, they've done a few things. There's the walled garden's been restored, the polytunnels have been created, there's building work going on in the stable block, which is kind of in front of the picture here, and the house itself has got all sorts of renovation. It now has electricity, and it has a water supply and a modicum of heating. But I think the point is that archaeology is only a small part of the activities of the house. There are other objectives in terms of helping it make a contribution to the local community in Bannockburn. Okay, so background to Bannockburn. The earliest appearance of a building at Bannockburn, at least on the site of where Bannockburn House is on Adair's map. And there's this strange structure which is shown. It probably 1680. It's about the time that the Pattersons bought the house, so it may be an early version of the house that's there, but it's probably not. It's probably an earlier building. And of course, Adair's map, you can't trust the location of it. It's not quite in the right place as far as the location is. But then Adair's map was not intended to be an assistance to geography. It was more of a sort of record of of who was where and what was where, without being particularly accurate. In Roy's map in 1750, we have a couple of buildings and the location. So Bannockburn House, the house as it stands at the moment, is in this place, but there is no building identified here. So the one on the right, I'm not sure what that is, but there is certainly, it's in the right location for the existing, or part of the existing house in here. And if this is the formal gardens, which it quite likely could be. Obviously, clearly there's a driveway heading straight for it, which is fine. And the lands are pretty much in the area that's marked by the red shape. Some of these other places no longer exist. Coal Hugh doesn't exist anymore. That's been wiped out by the motorway, as is some of this Psyche Home and others, and Moorside no longer exists as a village either. That was obliterated in the 20th century. Coming forward in time, the first edition of the Ordnance Survey shows Bannockburn House as we would recognise it now. This is the main Jacobean mansion, and from about 1700, There's also this ancillary building block and a couple of buildings over here, which neither of them still exist. They've been replaced. Moving on in time, so here's a aerial view taken, I think it's 2011. It's on Canmore, and this is the house, the ancillary buildings, stable block. So this is looking south. The buildings are sort of aligned east-west, north-south. So the driveway's on the north. This is the south. This is obviously the motorway. There is a formal garden area here. There's a walled garden in here. There's rougher ground over here, ground, and I'll show more of the studies of what we've done in both this east field area and in the west field over in this direction. There's not been much done on this sort of area here, which is still a bit of a mystery. There's a lot of building rubble in there, but it's not clear where it's come from or what it's doing. But we haven't really done any investigations in there yet. Okay, so here's a satellite image giving another view of the location. So this is looking straight down. Here's the motorway. This is the A91. And the lands that are owned by Bannockburn House Trust are covered by this area up here in the north. This is the west field, the east field, obviously the formal part of the grounds, and then there's all of this wooded area, which is part of an area called the Bloody Fold, which relates back to the Battle of Bannockburn, and all the land, all the wooded area down here is all part of the house grounds. We don't own any of the grounds to the south, and I've not been able to do any studies of anything to the south of the motorway. Okay, that's a more recent picture taken at in the evening, just showing it's a little bit more modern. But also, I did a LiDAR. Did some LiDAR interpretation of the site area. The one that's on National Library at the moment isn't great because there's a bit of interference on the area by the motorway, particularly just over the house, so it didn't work very well. So I've taken the data and done some processing myself, which I think hopefully shows up if there's anything in here. The house is in this location. You can see the driveway. You can see the ancillary buildings, and then there's something coming out down here. There's a field boundary along this edge. You can see where the trees are. There's a wooded area the other side of the A91, and there's this field area in here. Tantalizingly with the LiDAR, once you start zooming in too much, you lose resolution and it becomes less clear what's going on. But of what we can see on this, I draw your attention to this sort of circular feature here, because I'll be coming back to that later in the talk. And the other area that we've really investigated is in this area here, which again shows some contours for using the LiDAR image. Right, so where is the location in terms of history? So it's in this Bloody Fold area. This is the motorway junction, and the land we own is in this area just north of the motorway. It's kind of on the boundary of the supposed limits of Bannockburn, according to Historic Scotland, although it's not. Some of the land is within the area. It's this Bloody Fold area is the area that we own, that's within that identified area by Historic Scotland. More importantly, we're pretty much in the centre of what is thought to be the battle site of the Battle of Sockieburn, where James III was defeated by his son, James IV. And James III met his end at as the conclusion of that battle. So we have to be careful of, in doing any operations on any of the land, to look for any battle remains. I think, to cut a long story short, I would say we haven't found anything yet. No military equipment and no battle remains at all. Having done fairly extensive metal detecting over most of the site. Okay, so final map I want to show you is this Coal Authority abandonment plans, and what it shows is this is the house. These are the stable buildings. It shows that there is this coal seam identified as running through this area. There is an old shaft, and that is fenced off because it's a big hole in the ground. There are other shafts that some of them are fenced and some of them are capped, and there are some old pits identified in this area where we've done some work in the past. And again, I'll come on to that in a few minutes. Okay, so the first archaeology that was done was in 2017. There were some test pits dug in an area called the North Field, which I'm afraid I haven't been able to find the report to be able to share anything with you. But even so, there are no pictures of that in that report either, because basically they found very little. They found a few pieces of metal from well, it was agricultural debris from the 19th century, bits of barbed wire, bits of rusty nails and gates and staples, but nothing older. There is some work. In fact, I was up there last week, and there are a couple more small trenches gone in, not for archaeology, but to as part of works prior to them building a car park. And it's all pretty much just natural. There's a bit of coal on the surface, but apart from that, it goes down to the natural very quickly. And I didn't see anything in any of the area that had been turned over. Okay, so first, because of COVID, we sort of had an initial meeting in 2019, and then went straight into COVID, and were unable to do any work for 2 years, pretty much. So the first thing that we did was through Stirling Field and Archaeological Society, we knew there was a Victorian midden in the West Field, and so we thought we'd have a look at that and see if we could find what was going on. Yeah, it looked like it was, well, there was clearly a pit because of the topography. And this is on the left is what it looked like before we started, after the grass had been cut back. And then on the right is the more interesting of the trenches, which showed the orange stuff is the natural. And that looks like what has been done is there's been a test pit or a test mine looking for coal a test shaft has been dug. And then subsequently it's been filled up with midden debris from the Victorian house. No, it's Victorian. There were a lot of finds that were typical Victorian domestic, blacking bottles and lots of champagne bottles, mostly broken. In fact, most of the champagne bottles were in this area, of this part of the trench. I think what must have been happening is when they were chucking stuff out, they went along to to the pits where there was a cliff, this stony cliff area, and we're throwing the champagne bottles there to make them smash nicely. So we had a lot of glass coming out of this trench. On the other side of the green area, so sort of to the right of this picture, the other trenches were mostly full of ash from the fires, lots and lots of ash, and some building debris from when the Victorian extension flat roof had been put on. There was a lot of tar and tar paper and things. So also the builders had chucked all this stuff in this convenient pit when they were finishing up. So it was quite interesting in terms of telling us a bit about how the house had been built and a little bit about how it was used. But in terms of interesting finds, there was nothing that was spectacular. We had one pottery toothpaste box, a pottery box with some patent toothpaste label on it, but the rest was, as you'd expect, it was jars and bits of glass and perfume bottles and a few shoes, but nothing terribly exciting and nothing older than the Victorian stuff. Okay, let me move on. Okay, so moving on to 2019, when we had Rose Archaeology were invited along to do some geophys on two areas on the north lawns, which is the formal gardens to the north of the house, either side of the driveway. So reading on this on the left on the resistance map, this clear area here is the driveway, and there's a formal lawn to the left and another one to the right. And although the resistance survey just showed a sort of damp area here and a drier area on the, as you'd expect, on the lawns, what we did find were some interesting features here and here, particularly this one. So a darker area where there was some magnetometry, and there had been a tale that there was a well in this area. So we thought we'd have a close look at that. So this is that place area looking towards the house, so looking south, and there's a sort of depression in this part of the lawn, which you can see here. And doing a bit of probing, we could find there was stone which appeared to be around the perimeter of this. So I thought, yeah, brilliant, we've got a well. So we dug a trench in there and managed to find what we had was in fact a tree stand. So not archaeology at all, but well, archaeology, but it was a tree rather than a well structure. And sure enough, looking back through the photographic archives, we found a picture of the lawns taken in, I think, 1903, which shows a couple of trees on each side of this, in each of these grassed areas. So there was one tree here and another one nearer the house, and that was the same on both sides. So this was clearly decoration that they'd had, and wasn't a well at all. Okay, so this is where we were digging for that tree, and the midden site is over here in this part of the west field. So the other thing of interest was this line of, that's a field boundary. So to the left of that is agricultural. There's grazing for cattle in this area, and then there's a fence, and then there's a sort of dry area here which is fairly clear of trees. This darker area is a wetland, is actually parts of a pond. If we go back to the original, to the first series Ordnance survey map, you can see there are 3 ponds marked in here. So there's obviously some sort of water feature for the house has been put in here. I should say also that there's a sort of woody dell with a pond and water feature in this woodland area here, which has it's got specimen rock samples in it. Actually, it was constructed of, and there was a little waterfall made and a drainage pipe that took the water away into this wetland area, and it drained away down here. Okay, so in preparation for putting the polytunnels in this area, and the plan is to have woodland or an orchard in this west field, they came across some quite it became clear that there was something going across the field here. So a couple of trenches were commissioned. I should say this is before my time. So some trenches were Addyman Archaeology were engaged to dig a couple of trenches, and I was just becoming interested in the house at this time, so I didn't actually get involved in the dig. But what they found was a couple of cobbled surfaces. So it doesn't show it very clearly on here, but there's one runs across here, and then underneath it there's a wall of some description, or some large blocks making the corner of a wall, which was interesting but unexplained, and there was nothing further done. They were only commissioned to dig 2 trenches to identify what was happening with this cobbled surface. And this is just another picture of that corner underneath this cobbled surface here. This is a better view. That area that we've just looked at is down here, and then there's this second cobbled surface here. Now, what it appears that these are waggonways, probably for coal extraction, or at least for transporting coal away from the area, either down towards Pleen and down to the Forth, or possibly in the other direction up towards Bannockburn itself, and onto maybe Stirling, or down to the river, down to the Forth at Cambus Kenneth, which would be in the other direction. But quite nicely laid for transporting something heavy. The only heavy thing that they could be transporting along here would be coal, and there's plenty of coal dust in the remains in the archaeology to show that this is quite likely what they were moving. Right, so the next thing that was of interest to me was this circular feature that I pointed out over in the East Field. And again, the geophysics done in 2019. This is the circular feature, and there's something showing in the center of it. There's a blank area because there's a hawthorn tree in there, and they weren't able to get any readings in that area, so there's no data in there. And similarly with the resistance, that's where the hawthorn tree is, and there's a strong resistance. There's a bit of a damp area, and then there's this strong resistance, low resistance area showing here, and then a high resistance area around it. So speculation on that was that it was another mine, possibly a bell pit that had been capped, and that what we were seeing there was the capping, which was showing up as high density or high magnetometry, high level of magnetism because of the burnt material that had been put in, and then how that translated on the resistance didn't seem to quite add up. But that was the expectation, was that we had a capped bell pit or a collapsed bell pit, and that's why we had this sunken circular feature in the ground. So last year we finally got a chance to start looking at that. So we were uncovered the soil underneath, on top of the growth on top, to have a look at what was going on underneath. So this is looking south. The circular feature is this banking that's around here, and it sort of comes around and then behind us. And clearly what we can see here, this is peat and coal and wash up from the field above. There's this sort of, we've got down to the natural layer here, and it's a sort of sandy, muddy area. And then we've got this layer of stones that was coming out below that, on the flat area in the center of the of where the depression is. And taking it a bit further, what we found first was this part, and we speculated it was a collapsed wall. But then when we explored a little further, it became clear that there was something a little larger, and we've got the top of a vault of some sort. I mean, you can tell this when you start, if you stamp on the ground around here, you can feel that there's a bit of a hollow ring to it. We're not stamping very hard, but we're certainly, it's noticeable that there's a bit of reverberance going on in that area. And we've also got, there's some mortar, this floor surface here that's on top of this, or alongside this vault, and on the other side as well. We haven't been able to go any further. I'm talking to Murray Cook, who's our local authority archaeologist for Stirling. He's happy that it's a vault of some form and that it needs understanding a bit more. And he's going to come along this year when we intend to not excavate, but to uncover some more of the surface and try and determine what the extent of this structure is, because it's really quite exciting. Similar. All right, so there we go. Here's again looking east, and we can see there's the this is before we've dug across. You can see we've got this stonework going there and then disappearing. There's very little stone beyond this patch. But we don't know what happens where the wheelbarrow is and to the left of there, to the south of there. That's something that we're going to have to look into. We did get some pottery out of the location, not very much, but some, which appear to be 14th, 15th century pottery from jugs and which can only have come from that structure. So quite hopeful that we have possibly located the building that was present before Bannockburn House itself. The Jacobean mansion was there, which was a place called Drummond's Hall, although we don't have much documentary evidence to explain what that is or who or where it's from, but we can probably figure out who built it, but there's no evidence or no history or no documentation that identifies when it was built, just that it was there. And our intention is to try and uncover a little bit more to figure out where it is, and if it is this place, and then get it put on the record so that it can become protected, and we can hopefully then display that and explain a little bit more, do some more research into what Drummond's Hall was, and get it recognised. There's no records on Canmore that I've been able to uncover to identify where anymore of what it is, but we'll have to look into that. We'll get some more folks onto it.